Welcome back to the Shuffle Squad on the YouTube channel. As always, we're going to be bringing you an awesome weekly meta forecast. It's not the Shuffle Pod. I know it kind of looks like one, but we're going to be talking about all the decks coming out of Orlando and then going into Sao Paulo this weekend. We do have the Sao Paulo Regionals happening in Brazil, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that and what decks you should prepare for, whether you're going there or whether you're just playing in locals to rack up those championship points, because I know you want to go to Worlds. I want to go to Worlds. Everyone wants to go to Worlds, and we also want to earn that Poke money if you are going to regionals in the future. So you want to know exactly how to do that, and I've got the perfect cast here to talk to you about that. Today we have two lovely guests here on the Meta Forecast. We do have LDF and Josh. LDF, why don't you talk to the people about who you are, where they can find you, and how they will know who you are?
Yeah, so of course, I'm LittleDarkFury. You may have seen me on YouTube. I post a lot of videos on rogue decks, and this weekend I was at Orlando Regionals. I played a bit of a rogue deck myself. I guess you can consider it a rogue deck for that tournament specifically. Maybe not after Orlando, but yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter at LittleDarkFury.
Very cool. And Josh, coming fresh off a third place at the Orlando Regionals. Josh, how should the people know you, who you are, so on and so forth?
Hi, my name is Josh Frink, TSS member. I'm local to Chicago. Yeah, I got third place this past weekend with Gardevoir EX. You can find me on Twitter at DreamJew and on Metafy if you're interested in getting coached on Gardevoir, or at really any other deck at metafy.gg/ at Josh-Frink.
And as you can see, we got all the ats and the shareable things out of the way early on. That way you can focus in on some of the decks we're about to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about now is going to be Charizard. Obviously, Charizard has dominated. There were three major events this past weekend. There was not only the Champions League, there was also the Orlando Regional, and we had one other one. Guys, you remember what that other third event was? I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm sure. Oh, it was Perth Regionals. That's right. So Perth Regionals, two of them had Charizard, heavily favored in the top cut, winning the event. One of them had Giratina, but they did have a lot of Charizard in there. So the first thing I want to ask, LDF, let's talk to you a little bit about what your thoughts are. Do you think that Charizard is the best deck in the format right now?
Yeah, I think Charizard is by far none the best deck in the format. I think that haven't figured out like everything. I think the deck is a deck that can like always evolve and constantly kind of change up what's being played within the deck. But I do like Charizard with the Taunt engine, the Tura or the Bibarel and the Pidgeot. It's really, really good. I think that's like kind of the default best way to play the deck right now. We did see that did win the Orlando Regionals. And yeah, I think Charizard is BDIF. There's been a lot of talk about like, is Charizard on the same level as like Lugia, Silver Tempest? I think that it's more comparable to maybe like Palkia, Astral Radiance format, as opposed to like the Lugia meta. But Charizard definitely is the best deck right now. It's the most powerful, most consistent deck. And in thinking about it, there really isn't any like deck right now that just flat out beats Charizard. There's decks that are favored into it, like Giratina variants, but there is no straight up deck that just beats Charizard. And it feels like we're in that like meta where Charizard just controls the format, and it is the strongest deck in the format right now. And it's a deck that will continue to evolve. There's been different ways to play Charizard. Even at Perth Regionals, we saw a little bit of like technology being put within those lists.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard a lot of people from, the olden days, in air quotes here, compare this to kind of like the Buzzwole GX format, or maybe the Zoroark GX, or Josh, I think you even mentioned on Twitter, it's a tier 0 format. So talk to me a little bit more about your thoughts behind it being a tier 0 format and what type of skill goes into decks like these. Obviously, we're seeing different variants, more like the control variants. So what are your thoughts on that side of Charizard?
Sure. Yeah. So basically what a tier 0 format means, and I think the misconception that's kind of been like voiced in the Discord about whether or not Charizard is a tier 0 deck is that a lot of players now, because the community has really blown up in the last 2 years, have only experienced Lugia V-Star tier 0 format. Lugia V-Star is the best single deck ever printed in the history of the Pokemon TCG. And so you cannot look at a tier 0 deck and go, well, it's worse than Lugia, so it's not tier 0. What a tier 0 format means is that the format is completely revolved around either playing or beating a specific deck, right?
Right.
In this case, that's Charizard. There are, as LDF said, there are decks that take 60-40s into Charizard, right? Tina takes a 60-40 into it. Lugia will be generous and say that it's like a 60-40.
Yeah.
But no one is going into a tournament in this format being like, yeah, I don't care if I lose to Charizard.
Right.
I mean, maybe people are. I guess like Turbo Iron Hands players are like, yeah, I'll just dodge it. But that didn't work out so well this weekend.
Right.
Charizard is tier 0, right? Like, it is by far and away the best deck in the format. Every deck going forward needs to have an answer to it.
Right.
Or accept that you are rolling with the RNG and trying to, just dodge a deck that for the rest of the format, like, the play percentage is not going down, right?
No.
22% is the minimum that it will be for the rest of the format. I would not be surprised to see Charizard reach the same heights that Lugia V-Star did. But I agree with LDF. I don't think I would say Astral Radiance Palkia was a tier 0 deck because like that format to me felt more like a rock, paper, scissors meta with like the Arc Pika and the like that kind of thing. But like comparable to like ADP tier 0. Maybe Charizard is a little more fun to play against than ADP was.
Yeah, it's not as bad.
Yeah, you had your Luke medals every so often, which were, maybe a 50-50, depending on how you drew. You still had, Cincino Mill, one of my favorite decks in the format that was like, you beat ADP a lot of the time. But sometimes you didn't. But yes, exactly like that, which, a lot of people don't like that style of format. And that's where I think that Charizard's a little bit different when we're looking at Charizard from these past major events, that Charizard's adapted to the point where it's not just a straight up Charizard deck where you're going to get your Pidgeot out like it was prior to this format. There's control elements that help you with your bad matchups. We see that there's the Regieleki builds. We see that there's the Tord builds with the Turos and the Hero's Cape that's thrown in there. We've got the Prime Catcher. There's all this discourse on what is the best ace spec. So there's so many different ways to play one of the best decks out there, and I think that's
it's Prime Catcher.
It is Prime Catcher. You're right. I still say Hero's Cape is right underneath there, but that's my own opinion. Anyway, aside from that, I really think that it is because you can play it so many different ways, and that makes it more like a Zoroark GX type of deck where you can paint it with whatever color that you want, and it's still a good deck at the end of the day. And I think that's really how we have to look at Charizard. So if you're looking at Charizards as your potential deck for the next upcoming tournament, make sure that you're doing some research on the best way that you like to play it. And I think that's kind of where we'll leave it. We won't beat a dead horse by talking about Charizard over and over again. I want to talk about another deck that I've talked about within the Shuffle Squad in our own team Discords. And obviously Josh has kind of talked a little bit about it. Josh, talk to me a little bit more about Gardevoir and why you chose the deck and why you think it's good going forward too.
Yeah, so funny enough, my testing group has like kind of been like pretty vocal about the fact that we don't actually test. And so Alex and I going into this weekend, we had kind of a poor showing at UIC. We played the Moon deck, right. And we both lost to Pidgeot Control. And so we were trying to look at what we wanted to play. The first one was like Moon to Dunsparce, and like it's just really inconsistent, to be honest. We were thinking about playing Tina, but I don't own Tina V-Stars, and like the idea of playing a comfy deck to both Alex and I, we've both had our worst regional performances ever playing comfy decks. So it's just kind of like, it felt like maybe a weird choice. And so Thursday, I was just like scrolling through the UIC results and I saw the Gardevoir list and I messaged Piper and I was like, hey, can you like sort of give me a breakdown on your matchup percentages? Like, what are you looking to beat? And she talked to me about like all of these. Piper is a real one. Huge shout out, Piper Lapine. sent me like a novel about all of the matchups and was like, this is how you beat this, this is how you beat this, this is how you beat this. She's like, your worst matchup is like maybe Moon to Dunsparce, but they kind of suck, and like you can Iono Gust Greninja, and like future hands, like you can like use Mew EX, and we didn't end up playing the Mew EX, but
Right.
she's like, yeah, you can hit the Miraidon for knockout, and then hit the Iron Hands for 190, and then when they kill your Guardy, you kill the Iron Hands with Amp. And I was like, okay, like all of these lines, like these kinds of things are very cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, this seems like a good idea. And it was still, because Fabian got 9th, didn't top 8.
Right.
There's not as much like visibility on the archetype.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we ended up playing 58, I want to say,
I
of
think so.
Fabian's cards. We decided to go with Stefan's Stadium and like Raltz's, so 4 T-Burst and Collapsed, and Fabian's Ball Count, because losing to not having Gardevoir sucks.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think the deck was just incredibly well positioned for this event. A lot of people, I had multiple opponents throughout the tournament be like, yeah, I have no idea how I'm supposed to play this matchup. My round 9 day 1, my opponent surprised Delphoxed my only 2 Curlia game 2. And I won because he got rid of energy, and then I just had Mimikyu active and he couldn't deal with it. I think the deck takes a very solid Charizard matchup that is not into Tordzard. Tordzard makes it a little bit weirder.
Right.
You auto win Lost Box. You take a very favored Tina. You take a very favored Lugia. I was told that the Turbo Hands matchup is not great. I went 2-0-1 into it. I think it's fine. Iono, Screamtail, the Heavy Baton, Iron Hands is really hard for them to deal with. CPAL can be close, especially going into this event. I was like pretty confident it was 50-50, but because both of the top 8 lists played the Canceling Cologne, it's a little bit weirder.
Yeah.
And
it's just hard. That early Greninja is just, it's tough to deal with too.
Right. Yeah. Reagan in our round 12, Reagan turned to Canceling Cologne Greninja.
Yeah, I remember watching that. Yeah.
Yeah. It did not end well.
No.
So yeah, I think that matchup can be tough. But one of the big things for us is like you take a free stall matchup, you take a very solid Pidgeot control. And Alex and I both felt kind of burned after EUIC. So we were like, we're not losing to this. And I didn't hit one, but Alex did, and 2-0'd them. So
exactly. Well, I mean, good for Alex. So I'll always shout out. And then definitely talking to Piper, I know on one of our prior meta forecasts, you can always go back and watch that. Piper was also talking to us about Gardevoir, and that got me thinking. I mean, Josh, you know, in our B&B, I was saying I'm either playing Stall or Gardevoir. Those were my 2 decks going into EUIC, and I just couldn't lock in a deck. And I talked to Piper personally throughout the event, and you know, she was talking to me exactly about those lines, and I won't reveal it just yet, but I have some really spicy options you might see at a future event. But you know, Josh and I have also talked about those that aren't in the list, but there are some great lines. There are some fantastic lines nobody sees coming. You really have to understand the deck, and I know a lot of older Guardy players from the prior format don't necessarily want to pick up a deck like this. They want to play maybe something more consistent, where Guardy doesn't have that. You know, you can't just do the Greninja trick where you put all your Guardies on the bench anymore. So unfortunately, it is a little bit harder to get set up, but I honestly think the deck is pretty close to being as consistent as possible with your list. So LDF, let's kick it back to you. So you obviously were there at Orlando. You got to see this deck in action a little bit more. So would you say that Guardy's got a little bit more cooking to do? Do you think we're going to see a little bit more of it in these next few regionals now that it's become more of a real deck again?
Yeah, I think that Guardy is back in the meta in a big way. It's not going to be as dominant and as good as it was last format with the Guardy Arcanas and the Dacians and stuff, but the deck is still just very strong. Gardevoir has an insane ability. There's a lot of different like psychic partners you can play. I mean, I'm sure that we've kind of seen the ceiling of like Drifloon, Screamtail, Mimikyu, Fluttermane being kind of the main like attackers in the deck, but there definitely is a lot more you can do with Gardevoir. But I am sure we've kind of seen the majority of like the main attackers, but there are different versions of Gardevoir I've seen run around, especially like the Bayonet build and stuff. So
Yes.
Gardevoir is definitely a card that has experimentation and can be a deck that can evolve more going forward.
Right.
And I do think that it is a deck that is legit. There is one thing that I do think holds it back a little bit, and that is obviously the popularity of Lost Vacuum, which I
Yes.
think is like the big thing. The deck can do very well, and I'm sure that now, it's gotten top 4 at Orlando. It almost got top 8 at Orlando. There's almost 2 in top 8. So like the deck itself is very, very powerful right now, but it does, in my opinion, get held back a little bit by Lost Vacuum. But it is still a very strong deck. I feel like it's the
Right.
deck nobody really like respects right now. It reminds me
Yes.
of Lugia, where it's like the deck exists, but people are like, that deck sucks, and no one's actually gonna play it. And then, long and behold, the deck just kind of has a big pop off out of nowhere.
That's very true.
Interesting that you say that, because I've heard a lot of people say like Lost Vacuum is really bad for the deck, but most matchups that they're gonna Lost Vacuum you, they Lost Vacuum and then you go, here's Mimikyu, and they go, oh,
True.
Pass. That happened to me like 4 times throughout the event.
Right,
like
yeah.
against Zard, like that's the thing about the Zard matchup, right? Is the turn you kill the Pidgeot, they have to find Gust and they have to find Vacuum. If they don't find both, they still lose the game. Because
Right, yeah.
if they go Vacuum Drifloon and you give them Mimikyu, what can they do?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it's the same sort of thing in the Arctina matchup as well, where like I hit 2 Arceus this weekend, both of them vacuumed my Drifloon, and I went, here's Mimikyu, and both of them went pass.
Yep. So there's lots of cute little cards that you can put in there. I did love the inclusion of the Flutter Mane in there too, which was very cool. Very good tech for a lot of decks, especially into Lost Zone box decks. You put that in front of a Comfy and you say, here, you can sign the slip here now, or we can play the rest of the game. But that's kind of how Gardevoir goes. So I would hope to see Gardevoir a little bit more respected, especially after your run, Josh, here. So we'll kick it over to a different type of deck, one that's a little spooky when it goes into single prize decks. We're going to talk about Future Box. And I know it takes terrible, you know what, I won't say terrible. It takes it a unfavored matchup into Charizard, but there's been some spicy little additions that have gone into Future Box. So LDF, what do you think about Future Box into the next couple of major events?
I think that the future variants are they're strong, and like Iron Hands is a very like powerful card to play against. Like it's very scary when your opponent amps you and you can't really beat that. And when they have all the gusting, and the Miraidon's really annoying too, because like it can actually do good damage, build up the board, and like when you knock out Miraidon, sometimes you walk into like counter catcher loops when you start killing the Iron Hands and stuff. But yeah, the main issue that I have with the deck is its hard matchup is pretty bad. You can do a lot. You can knock out the Pidgeots, obviously. You can go around the Charizard. I'm sure they're going to have Pokemon in play that you can knock out, but it is still a very tough matchup. I have seen different versions, though, of the deck. We've seen it with Iron Leaves in the deck with Grass Energy to help a little bit against Charizard. I do like that idea a lot, too. And then there's the Crisis Punch. The Crisis Punch idea, I think, is really strong also, because you can use Crisis Punch at the end of the game with some Iron Crown damage to one-hit KO a Charizard EX. I think that there are definitely ways you can counter Charizard. It's not like an auto loss per se. It's just obviously a tough matchup. You have to play it very well. But it is still going to be one of your worst matchups. But it's one of those decks where like you can dodge the Charizard. You're probably going to end up hitting a few no matter what. It's Charizard. You're not going to be able to avoid it most likely. But if you can, dodge Charizard enough, you can still have a hot run with the deck. And it does, obviously walk all over Lugia. I think that its matchup against Ancient Box is decent too. Which now that deck might be a lot more popular post Orlando. I think its Lost Tina matchup isn't bad. I think your Arc matchups are a little shaky though, because they have like the ability to like Maxim Bell one shot you. But it's definitely like a pile, but it's a pile that does work, and it's very scary when it does work in that regards.
Absolutely. Now, going back over to you, Josh, a little bit, I know that you played 2 major events, and they're giant events, right? You played EUIC, you played Orlando, biggest IC to date, biggest regional to date. Out of all the decks you played, would you have rather had a 60-card deck of Future Box sleeved up against the majority of what you hit in day 1 and day 2?
No. I didn't hit... EUIC, my first 2 rounds were Zard. I think I hit 3 of them.
Yeah.
in day one of UIC. That being said, if I had the Crisis Punch technology and people didn't see it coming, maybe I would have felt okay.
Yeah.
I just Future Box is too gimmicky of a deck to me.
Right.
It relies so heavily on like your one Miraidon powering up one Iron Hands, and then that Iron Hands being able to power up another Iron Hands via Heavy Baton.
Mm-hmm.
And like there are just too many things in the format that can make that plan fail.
Right.
Like LDF said, there's the prevalence of Lost Vacuum in the format.
Yeah.
If Guardy becomes more popular, people try to tell me that matchup is bad for Guardy, but it's not. Like
No,
screen tailing your opponent's Iron Hands when it's on the bench, like they're cooked.
the possibility with all the cards in that deck, it's not like old Miraidon. It's not like you're putting Iron Hands down in turn one, you're Ampu very muching, and
Right.
and then you can't do it over and over again because the cycle. I mean, you can also play Lost Vacuum and Guardy too. So I mean,
you shouldn't just gust around the heavy baton.
Exactly. So I mean, having a double Iron Hands look you in the face is not as scary as it used to be. In the prior formats, unless it's in another deck we'll talk about here in a second. But as far
I think
as
Turbo Hands is cope. I really do. I think like your best matchup was Lugia, and at UIC, I think it was reasonable to assume there was going to be a lot of Lugia.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable anymore. And unless your reasoning for playing Turbo Iron Hands is like, this is the only deck I'm confident I can play perfectly.
Right. Yep.
Don't play it. Like that deck is just not, I don't know. It like I struggle to say it's tier 2.
Got it. Yeah, I would agree with that. So if you're looking at playing Future Box, maybe set it back in the binder for a little while and wait for Lugia to be good again or something else, and see what happens in the next format. So maybe it's time to put Future Box in the past. But let's talk about some of the other lists here. Josh, we'll keep it on a train with you here. Decks we love to hate is going to be the next topic here. And there's 2 decks that we want to talk about. It's Lost Zone Box variants and Chen Pao. Now, both of these decks are prevalent in the meta. They're strong decks, but the problem is they have an inconsistency issue. Now, not to say that a great pilot behind these decks cannot do well. It obviously can. We've seen that happen time and time again. But Josh, talk to me a little bit about what you think of both of these archetypes into the next major event.
Yeah, I think CPOW is probably really well positioned. Presumably, Sao Paulo will have the least per capita number of max belts in Charizard since rotation, which is really like what makes CPOW scared of Zard. I think the matchup is probably favored for CPOW if Charizard does not have the Airy, doesn't have the max belt. Like those are a lot of the tools that you use to use them. And now we've seen two majors, not 2 regionals, won by this Zard list that's not playing Devo, not playing Airy, not playing max belt. And I think that says good things for Chen Pao.
Right.
I don't actually think the deck is that inconsistent. I think a lot of people mistake a very fine line of like you need perfect sequencing or the deck will brick with the deck is inconsistent. Every deck has hands where you don't play the game. I don't think CPOW is that much worse in that respect.
Right.
But it is very fragile. CPOW presents a lot of very fragile board states. It has a lot of very fragile sequencing. And if any of those things go wrong, it can be tough. Lost Box is kind of the opposite for me. There's a lot of really high skill expression. I don't think the deck is inconsistent either.
Right.
You're never really presenting fragile board states, right? Exactly. Lost Box can do anything on any turn pretty much. My big issue with Lost Box is I don't think there's a really good way to make you consistently beat Charizard. And if the 2 most popular decks are going to be like Charizard and Chen Pao, those are 2 kind of bad matchups. So I think the meta is good for CPOW. and the deck is like maybe a little fragile, whereas
Right.
the meta is bad for Lost Box. But if you hit the right matchups, you're very consistent.
Right. I think so too. And LDF, would you agree or disagree with both of those takes on Lost Zone Box and Sea Power right now?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. I think Shempao was a very good play for Orlando because there was so much Charizard. I find that like a lot of the time we see like the Shempao board of directors are always the ones that are doing really good in the tournament. So it's like definitely a high skill expression deck where it does require a lot of sequencing. It is fragile. I do think though, after looking at like what we saw at Perth with like the Reggie Lecky Charizard deck doing well, I don't know how that'll translate into like Sao Paulo, but that's a pretty scary deck for Shempao to see.
Yes.
Erie, still is somewhat being played in Charizard right now. I don't think Maxim Belt is going to be popular in Charizard right now. I think it's mostly going to be either Hero's Cape or Prime Catcher, which I do think Hero's Cape is a bit worse than Prime Catcher, mainly because you can actually make a Charizard really hard to KO with Shempao. I do like the List Dragon Blade with the Silene in the deck to try to get back resources. Shempao is a deck that does require a lot to do in one turn. It's a very combo focused deck. If Charizard can Erie away some of those crucial resources like superior retrievals or rare candies, a lot of the time you just run out of steam in the late game and you just kind of can't win the game.
Right.
And I think that Shempao definitely is a very strong deck that can beat anything when it sets up, but it does have those like Josh said, inconsistencies and fragile board states. And then obviously Lost Box, it's a very strong deck. It has a lot of potential, like turn 2, Mirage Gates are very, very scary, and you have a lot of different attackers to choose from. We've actually seen a ton of random Lost Zone decks do well at Orlando. There was like the Hunter Brotherless with the Shaman and the Groudon.
Yeah.
There's like the more traditional Hoopa Moon Hands deck. There's the list Xander and Victor played with the Iron Valiant, Crown Hands concept. There was like the Maridon EX Lost Box deck. There's so many like random ways to play Lost Zone. There's the Radiant Charizard versions. But at the end of the day, yes, Lost Zone will always have a hard time against Charizard. It is tough when Charizard just kind of sits there, goes Rare Candy, Charizard, 330 HP Pokemon, Iono to like 4 cards, and you just can't piece together a Mirage Gate combo or something, and you just kind of lose. And Charizard is still going to be a tough matchup for Lost Box. I don't know if there's a great way to beat it, even if you were to play Shaman and Tropius Glasses or like whatever crazy grass tacker still existed in the format. I think Charizard would still give you a run for your money because they can sit there, Iono, Roxanne spam you, present you with a monstrous 330 HP Pokemon. But Lost Zone is still like good into like Tina. I think your Lugia matchup's pretty solid. But those decks are just not as prevalent right now as they were before. And when Charizard and Shempao are the 2 most popular decks, it gets really tough for Lost Box to get over those. Like you can beat Shempao if they have a slow setup because you can try to like get Sableye out as quick as possible and try to take out their Friggies, but the matchup is still in favor because they can like prime catcher you. They can put hands in the play. It's tough, but yeah. I think Lost Box is still like an okay deck. I wouldn't call it any more than like maybe like tier 2. Like it's probably better than Future Hands and Lugia, but I don't think it's like any higher.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I love a Lost Box deck more than anyone, but at this point, I'm done selecting my flowers. I'm ready to play a different style of deck, for sure. So, talking about that a little bit more, we touched on Giratina and Giratina V-Star. Let's talk about Arctina. Is it the best Tina in the room? So back to you, LDF. I want you to talk a little bit more about Arctina and what your thoughts are behind that.
So yeah, going into Orlando, the group that I was staying with, my friends Sashi, Mario, Jeff, Anil, and Justin, they were all like cooking Arctina for like the longest time. That they were sold on Arctina for Orlando for the longest time. They tested for like a couple weeks and really did a good job, I think, kind of making the deck as consistent as possible. And they added trekking shoes into the deck. They played 4 shoes, just straight consistency, have higher percentages of hitting that turn 1 energy arc, and shoes just being good, to help you kind of draw cards, get rid of useless stuff. It's a very strong card within the deck. We saw Arctina flop in EUIC. It didn't do that great. I think Michael Cremont did the best with the deck, and it was like not even a top 64.
68th, yeah.
68th,
yeah. It's pretty brutal for Arctina because it was a pretty hyped up deck, I think, going into UIC. And then I think post UIC, I think a lot of people were just like, okay, this deck's kind of a pile. It kind of sucks. Doesn't beat a lot of the meta. But I do think Arctina is a real deck. It's a deck that does revolve very heavily on the ability of just the power of Arceus V-Star. It's a very aggressive, very scary deck when you can get like judged turn 1 and you're staring down this Arceus V-Star with 280 HP that's like loading up these other big attackers in the bench. I also think it is one of the only decks that has a solid Charizard matchup if you go first. I think if the deck goes second and they attack you first, the Zard matchup is unfavored. But if you go first and get turn 2 Starbirth off and you can like judge a Cleffa away or whatever, judge a Cleffa hand away. The matchup is pretty favored for you.
Yeah.
But the deck does have its issues. Obviously, I think its Shenpao matchup isn't fantastic. I think that your matchup against Gardevoir probably isn't very fantastic either. Your lost Tina matchup also doesn't seem very good. But it is a deck that I think has a decent time into Charizard. A lot of the time going into a Charizard matchup blind, they're gonna choose to go second. You'll turn energy arc, attach pass, and you like follow up like a judge or whatever, and it's like they're gonna struggle to keep up. Arctina's decent. I think it's a strong deck. I think it's just going to be a deck no one's really going to like expect or think of, and I think it's always going to have these consistent placements. I don't think it's a deck that can ever win a regional. It does have a lot of really scary matchups. It really does rely on just like judging and just being like, all right, good luck, man. Like,
hopefully, I mean, and even Sashi,
beat me.
Sashi got 11th place, and they were playing like the 4-4 Arceus line, which is
just max consistency. Yeah, that's what they were trying to do.
It was wild.
4 shoes, 4 for arc. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. So, Josh, I know that you have opinions on any Arc deck, really. But Arc Tina, do you think it's the best Tina deck? Would you sleeve that up over another Arceus deck? Because I feel like there's a couple of Arc decks we haven't talked about.
That's a good question, yeah.
So, what do you think about Arceus and Tina?
In order, it is not the best Tina deck.
Okay.
And it is the best Arceus deck.
Got it.
I agree.
I don't think it's really close in either race also. Lost Zone Tina is really strong. Like, it is probably the second best deck in the format.
Okay.
Probably. I know it didn't have as strong of a showing this weekend, and maybe the advent of, like, Guardy coming back is bad for it, but also Lugia is going down in play, so I can't imagine that it really is like that much different.
Right.
I just think like Tina is incredibly strong. It probably has the best matchup into Charizard of any of the meta decks. You take some weird matchups. The Chen Pao matchup's a little unfavored. The Lugia matchup is definitely a little unfavored as well.
Right.
But like you can beat anything, really.
Yeah.
And especially like it took a much worse matchup into Stall this format because you don't have path bumps, or not. Sorry, the opposite. You don't have temple bumps because there's no path. But that deck doesn't really exist anymore because it's terrible into like most of the decks that did well at UIC in Orlando. So I think Tina is by far and away better than Arc Tina. I think probably if the meta is tier 0 Charizard, tier 1 is Chen Pao Tina. Arc Tina is the best Arceus deck because it can do the most things. And actually, I think Arc Tina actually takes a favored matchup into regular Tina now if you play Radiant Gardevoir, because they have no way to one-shot Arceus.
No.
The thing that we found in testing, though, is that the Tina player will just, like, they'll go immediately after the Gardevoir. You'll bench it, and they'll just, like, knock it out with Shred or something, and then you just can't get it back. That was what we found was kind of tough in the matchup. But yeah, the Gardevoir makes the matchup a lot more like it's not as bad
because then you have to try to clean up with Sableye, I suppose.
Yeah,
and that's just
and I think like Arceus forcing Tina even to take a one prize knockout, especially when Tina has to spend turns early. Like setting up, right? It's definitely Tina is a lot more turbo than it was last format, but
for sure.
I think the matchup is at least close. Arc Tina takes a lot more polarizing matchups. You're probably going to lose to your bad matchups. You're probably going to beat your good ones.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't play Arc Tina. I think Arceus is just not the god of Pokemon that it used to be. It really is like like Arceus is literally the Pokemon god, but nothing changes the fact that Charizard is Pokemon's favorite.
That is
so I don't know. Arctina is probably the best arc, but I just don't think Arceus is that well positioned right now.
Right. I would agree with that. So let's move on to a different deck. And Josh, you have some experience playing a deck like this, and we obviously saw it do really well at Orlando Regional. And this is going to be Dino Box, Arc Box, Dino Nuggies, Double Moon, any of that stuff. Let's talk about it. Is it going on your testing spreadsheet? And if yes, why?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It got second. You have to respect
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a single prize deck that, in theory, has an infinite, well, not an infinite, but like a very high damage cap,
Right.
which is something that players like to play.
Right.
So you have to respect it to some extent. My thing is like, even if you take a bad matchup into Ancient Box, the deck kind of folds to kill Greninja Iono.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a pile.
Yeah, like that was my experience at UIC. Like, there were so many people that would just like gust my attacker, and I'm looking at a hand full of energy, and I'm like, wow, if you just killed Greninja here, I'm cooked. Like, it's over.
Yep.
But people don't, which is nice, right? Like, to some extent, you can rely on your opponent really not knowing what to do.
That's true, too.
But I personally prefer to assume going into tournaments that my opponents will play well against me. It's nice when they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Moon to Dunsparce in theory fixes that issue where like you're
Yeah.
not as weak to Boss Greninja Iono.
I would agree with that.
The issue is like this is the first deck that I have played this format where I'm like, this deck really, really wishes VIP Pass didn't rotate. Because you just need so many basic Pokemon turn 1 and turn 2. And like Artisan is cool, but it is nowhere near as good as like if you could just go like Nest Ball for Greninja, VIP, Moon Dunsparce, the deck would easily be tier 1, 1.5.
Right.
But as it stands, it's so hard to establish a board in a meaningful way. I don't know. I think Ancient Box is just like the risk reward of playing like the Flutter mains and like taking a positive Chen Pao matchup and that kind of stuff. I think it's just better to play Ancient Box personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you could play 4 Dittos, but then
That'd be bad.
I'll talk to you about the house you'll build with your deck afterwards. But anyway, moving on to you, LDF. What do you think? Do you think that you would sleeve up just a regular Ancient Box? Or do you think you'd go for the double moon?
That's what I played at Orlando.
Okay. So talk to me about your experience actually playing the deck in a format like this.
Yeah, so I played Ancient Box to UIC, the Koraidon build. I played a very similar 60 to what Gabriel Fernandez won a UIC with.
Right.
I cut a Koraidon for a Cobalion to help against Zard.
Right.
Because I think Zard is a very tough matchup for the deck, especially the Tord build with the double Turo. Because a lot of the time you are two-shotting them. You can definitely ramp up damage in the late game and kill their Pidgeots. And you can even kill Charizard, but it is very tough to kill Charizard, especially when they can sit there and just constantly Iono and Roxanne spam you. They have Turos. Like, it is a tough matchup. So I added the Cobalion in to help fix the Charizard matchup. It did win me a game against Charizard this weekend. In experience, it is a very high rolly deck. You need basically to get like, you need to constantly like chain supporters. It's a very snowball effective deck. Like you want to be going like Explorer's Guidance into Sada, into Guidance. You just want to be chaining supporters. The Radiant Greninja is the core of the deck. Like Josh said, if that Greninja gets taken out early, it's bad. I had a lot of opponents this weekend who did recognize how strong Greninja was, and they immediately took it out, and it put me kind of on the back foot for a bit. I do like the Pokestops in the deck, though, over playing Artisan, because Pokestop is so good when you're playing 4 Nest Balls and 4 Pokegears and 4 Vessels. Like, it makes it so easy to just kind of chain. A lot of the time, Pokestop was my draw engine. I had so many games where I literally couldn't find Greninja or was prized, but I kept using Pokestop, and it kept finding me Vessels and Pokegears, and it kept me in the game. Pokestop is very good in Ancient Box. The deck is really good into Lost Zone variants. It's really good against Shenpao. I didn't lose to a single Lost Zone or Shenpao deck the entire weekend. I beat a Snorlax deck thanks to Penny and Palpad. You can just sit there, Penny, Palpad, whatever, and then just go into Moon. You just vengeful fletching them to death.
Yeah.
The deck is very, very strong when it doesn't brick, but its main issue, it does brick. I had a few games this weekend where my Pokegears were not finding me Sadas, and I couldn't stay in the game because of it, or I, didn't have a supporter in my opening hand. I had no way to find Radiant Greninja, or I had to Ultra Ball away valuable resources in the early game to even find a Greninja, which sent me back in the late game.
Right.
The deck can lose to pretty bad Ionos. A lot of my losses this weekend were because they Iono me, and I couldn't close out the last knockout because the Iono to 2 was so bad. But it is a very strong deck, in my opinion. It can beat a lot of the metas. I think it could beat Tina, Lost Box, Shenpao. I think your matchup into Gardevoir's, I assume it would be good because you have Dark Pokemon. I think the deck has a lot of good matchups, but you probably will take a tough matchup to Zard. I think Zard will be tough. And if Zard plays stuff like Hero's Cape, or even they put Lost City in the deck, or whatever they do, the matchup is still going to be very tough. That's the only thing holding me back from playing the deck, is I think your Zard matchup is really difficult. And to emphasize that, what made it worse was like I would lose one game to Zard, so I make him go first, I make them go first. They still found turn 2 Charizard. And even just the threat of having a turn 2 Charizard, when you're slowly sitting there trying to build up a board, it's like so bad. You just sit there and say, just go Burning Darkness knockout. You're doing nothing. It's just bad. And I don't know if I'd play the deck again because of how good Zard is.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything you can do to fix the matchup. Like I said, you have the Cobalion. I've seen people play Great Tusk to help in the matchup. The Zard matchup's always going to be tough in my opinion, and I think that's going to be the one thing holding the deck back.
Exactly. All right, well, let's talk about the same thing that we talk about in every meta forecast, what we think this weekend's predictions for the top 3 in the meta share graphic are going to be. So we'll hit it back over to Josh here. Josh, what do you think your top 3 going into Sao Paulo would be for this weekend?
I think the obvious top 3 is Charizard, Chenpao,
Mm-hmm.
That's my answer.
That's pretty much
That's it. Yeah.
Nice, simple, to the point. LDF, would you agree, disagree? Do you think there may be some swaps in that top 3?
Nah, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I can probably, it's probably going to be Zard, Chenpao in that order specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Charizard's probably still going to be over, 20% of the meta, probably going to be potentially even higher because it's what, in Brazil? And Brazil loves Charizard. They literally invented Arvinzard. So it's probably going to be at least like 23% of the meta, in my opinion. I think that we will see a bit of a rise in Gardevoir's popularity. I can definitely see Gardevoir going up to like top 5.
That would be cool.
I think we might see a little bit more of the ancient stuff, probably replacing where Future Hands will be on the graphic. That's just kind of my opinion on where it would be.
Well, I mean, the Fernandez brothers do enjoy a ancient box, so we'll
see if they run it back.
Yeah, we'll see if they made some innovative techs or cuts or pluses into the list and see how that pans out over there in Sao Paulo. All right, getting to my most anticipated part, the favorite part of these meta forecasts is going to be the rogue deck, and who better to kick us off here than LDF? What is your favorite rogue deck in the format right now, and something that you'd love to see do well this weekend?
Probably favorite rogue deck probably would just be like Arc Piles. We did see a few cool ones. We saw Israel Sosa play like an Arc Gudra deck, which was kind of sick. Makani Tran was playing an Arc Pidgeot box deck with Vulpix and Regigigas. I like the idea of Arc Pidgeot a lot. I think there is a lot of unexplored potential with that deck specifically. I'm just hoping to see more creative Arc decks. There was an Arc Regidrago deck in day 2, which is really cool. Arc definitely is a deck that like relies very heavily on where the meta is. But I do think that the deck, just Arc in general, there's so many ways to play it. I love seeing good Arc decks. I love to see cool Arc piles, and hopefully we continue to see like these really interesting Arc decks do well. Like I said, I think there is potential for Arc Pidgeot to be explored a little bit more further. I think that the idea of like Arc Gudra is really cool. I don't know if that deck will like continue to see play at all, because Israel Sosa is like kind of like, he likes to play the more like off meta stuff.
Right.
So we'll see if this deck actually has legs or anything. But yeah, I like Arc decks, and I'm hoping to see some cool Arc stuff this weekend.
Very cool. All right, Josh, kicking it back over to you. Any rogue decks that you'd like to see do well? And if they do well, we want to see them do well in Sao Paulo.
The last time I was on one of these and you asked me what I wanted to see in a rogue deck, I said Zorobox. And then at 3-0 in Vancouver, I hit Zorobox and got cooked.
Did you hit Kobe?
Yeah.
No.
Same
no,
group,
it was
right? From Tabletop, right?
Yeah, I can't remember his name. As I'm answering this question, I'm gonna look because I know that they have Twitter. Yeah, okay, sorry. It was Aban.
Okay. Yeah.
It was Aban who I hit. And so I feel like I have too much like power to influence my my opponents. My answer is Dialga.
Okay.
Cool.
Drew Kennett got 21st with a very, very interesting take on Dialga with no Evo TMs. And Max Belt.
Yeah.
I was playing the deck last night. It is very hard.
Yes.
It is very hard to play. This sequencing, you would not think that Dialga would be hard, but like when you're supposed to Metang or Supporter first or Greninja first is really weird math. So I would love to see somebody have another run with that deck. If it's true, I mean, it won't be true because I don't think Drew's going to Sao Paulo, but I would love to see somebody run the Dialga because I think the Zard matchup is actually pretty good with the Max Belt.
Well, one thing to note, I don't think Drew played against any Zard at all in Orlando.
Really?
I think so.
I'll have to go
I
back.
saw it somewhere, but I don't know if he played against a single Zard. I could be wrong, though.
Let's call up Jared Grimes on the phone a friend and see if Jared can look it up.
Now I'm curious.
Yeah, that's interesting because the max belt is only in there for that matchup.
Right.
Otherwise, Prime Catcher is just better. But yeah, I don't know. I was playing it last night and I was impressed, but also I had like 2 games where I opened Beldum 7 energy. So who knows? But it would be cool to see it do well. I really like Dialga as a card. So
yep. All right. Well, I'm gonna release my 2, and one's a cope pick and one's a hope pick. So let's see which one actually performs. But I think that the cope pick is going to be because we've seen it at a couple of events already. Is going to be the Espathra and the Net. I think that deck is really cool. Does it beat Charizard? Probably not, but it has a chance.
A good Zard. It does not beat a good Zard player.
Does not beat a good Zard player, and there seems to be a lot of those in Sao Paulo. But I would love to see somebody maybe take an interesting take of the deck, see it do well. And the other one I'd hope to see, but I probably won't see it, is the single prize for Relegator deck. I think that actually has some cool lines in it. It has some interesting ways. I mean, it can swing 280 damage. You can use Neo Upper Energy. I would love to see that actually happen. You can use TM Crisis Punch in that deck. That's another thing that I've seen added in there. So I would love to see it do well. I don't think it will, but if it does, cheers to you for playing that deck.
True.
As far as that goes, those are my 2. I can't release any other spicy lists yet, but we'll get there. You could always check out some other interesting decks on everybody's channel here, and we'll talk about those. But those are the rogue decks. That's all we have here for the show today. I'm gonna let everybody give their shout outs, and Matt, we'll kick it back over to you. Any shout outs you want to give to wrap this thing up here?
Yeah, shout out to the Shuffle Squad, and shout out to all my boys who played Arctina this weekend, and shout out to my my YouTube channel, I guess. There you go.
Awesome. And Josh, any shout outs you'd like to give?
Yeah, shout out Alex and Burge and Kreckler for being a great testing group. Shout out my boys on the Shovel Squad for all the support this weekend. And again, my Twitter is @DreamJew. My Metafy is @Josh-Frink. Best way to get good is to have somebody good tell you what to do.
That's right. And if you want more people to tell you good things to do, you can always check out our Patreon here. It's patreon.com/TSSwin, where we post articles from all of our pro players on the team every single day of the week. So you want to check that out. And you can also check out all of the other awesome sponsors that help the Shuffle Squad and everyone here on this podcast to do what we do in life with Pokemon TCG. And you can also save some money on some awesome product there. So you're going to want to check that out too. My name is PJ. That's all I have here on the Meta Forecast, but we will catch you next time on the Shuffle Squad.
Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.